That when we had a president, we'd see a giant global political figure, the man that would be the political leader for 500 million people, the man that would represent all of us on the world stage, the man whose job was so important that, of course, you're paid more than President Obama. Well, I'm afraid what we got was you. And I'm sorry, but after that performance earlier that you gave, and I don't want to be rude, but you know, really, you have the charisma of a damp rag and the appearance of a low-grade bank clerk. And the question that I want to ask, that we're all going to ask is, who are you? I'd never heard of you. Nobody in Europe had ever heard of you. I would like to ask you, President, who voted for you? And what mechanism? Oh, I know democracy is not popular with you lot. And what mechanism do the peoples of Europe have to remove you? Is this European democracy? Well, I sense, though, that you're competent and capable and dangerous, and I have no doubt that it's your intention to be the quiet assassin of European democracy and of the European nation states. You appear to have a loathing for the very concept of the existence of nation states. Perhaps that's because you come from Belgium, which of course is pretty much a non-country. But since you took over, we've seen Greece reduced to nothing more than a protectorate. Sir, you have no legitimacy in this job at all, and I can say with confidence that I can speak on behalf of the majority of the British people in saying we don't know you, we don't want you, and the sooner you're put out to grass, the better. We're in the presence of a great man today, the President of Europe, a man who is so important. He is beyond criticism, beyond reproach. He is the king of the modern political class. He is the modern-day Zeus, and he intends to rule us from Mount Berlaymont, and woe betide anybody that questions his authority or questions his dignity, or they will face severe punishment. Indeed, in my case, the last time we met, and I had one or two things to say, the Parliament imposed the maximum possible fine. And I'm told that if I say anything that upsets you, the microphone will be cut off. Well, what price free speech? What price democracy? You're the head of a new economic government for 500 million people. And you've launched your 10-year plan, your wish list. And I just wonder, have you remembered what happened to the last 10-year plan that was launched in 2000? It was launched in this Parliament to much acclaim. It was a total and utter crippling failure even before the global recession hit. And in fact, all centralised EU plans fail. Just look at the disastrous, ruinous common fisheries policy. And now your beloved euro has failed. It's failed politically at its first major hurdle. You weren't able to come up with a plan at that summit. You can't bail out Greece without the International Monetary Fund coming in to save, at least for the moment, your euro dream. And yet, Mr Van Rompuy, your plan seems to be we're losing, we're failing, let's have more of the same. Let's have more Europe, let's have more failure. But what really matters is the loss of democracy here. You have not been elected. You are not accountable. There is no mechanism for the peoples of Europe to remove you. And this goes with everything, doesn't it? Every single one of these policies fails, leads to a problem, whether it's this, whether it's the euro, and all the way through we see this fanatical political ambition to create a United States of Europe, regardless of the consequences, and at no time has any of this been endorsed by the voting public. That, Mr Barroso, is the true State of the Union. Increasingly people are saying, we don't want that flag, we don't want the anthem, we don't want this political class, we want the whole thing consigned to the dustbin of history. And we had the Greek tragedy earlier on this year, and now we have the situation in Ireland. Now, I know that the stupidity and greed of Irish politicians has a lot to do with this. They should never ever have joined the euro. They suffered with low interest rates, a false boom and a massive bust. But look at your response to them. What they're being told, as their government's collapsing, is that it would be inappropriate for them to have a general election. In fact, Commissioner Rehn here said they had to agree their budget first before they'd be allowed to have a general election. Just who the hell do you think you people are? You are very, very dangerous people indeed. Your obsession with creating this Euro state means that you are happy to destroy democracy. You appear to be happy for millions and millions of people to be unemployed and to be poor. Untold millions must suffer so that your Euro dream can continue. Well, it won't work, because it's Portugal next. With their debt levels of 325% of GDP, they're the next ones on the list, and after that I suspect it will be Spain. And the bailout for Spain would be 7 times the size of Ireland, and at that moment all of the bailout money has gone. There won't be any more. But it is even more serious than economics, because if you rob people of their identity, if you rob them of their democracy, then all they are left with is nationalism and violence. I can only hope and pray that the Euro project is destroyed by the markets before that really happens. It truly is an absolute farce, but nobody here dares to admit it because you are all in denial. Belgium is a microcosm from the entire European Union. Belgium is about to fall to bits and the rest will follow. Happy Christmas, everybody. Thank you. What is the most commonly used word in association with the euro? No, it's not failure, though it could be. No, it's stability, isn't it? A decade ago, everybody said, once we've got the euro currency, it will bring us stability. Well, I would suggest a decade on that what it has brought is chaos, discord and misery for millions. And yet the word stability, still being used this morning. Mr Barroso used it, Mr Van Rompuy used it. Well, Mr Barroso, I enjoyed your view of the world today, but it was perhaps rather more ironic than you'd intended. You talked about the events in Egypt and elsewhere, saying, isn't it wonderful that people are rising up seeking democracy? I would remind you that democracy is a method whereby you vote for people who govern you, and then if you don't like what they do, you can get rid of them, turf them out and put somebody else in. But it was ironic because then your next sentence was, and that is why in Europe, facing the euro crisis, we must reinforce the community method. Now, for the public watching in on this, which increasingly they do, the community method means that laws are proposed in secret by unelected bureaucrats, people like you. Oh yes, I know, the European Parliament voted for you, but you were the only candidate that was offered to us. You know, that isn't democracy. Mr Van Rompuy, I hope you will resist the calls for military action this afternoon. Indeed, the Liberal leader, Mr Verhofstadt, made a very pro-war speech. I hope you will resist that on the grounds that there is no legitimacy or consent for the European Union to take military action, and that experience shows that if you go into military action, that may be easy, but getting out of it can be rather more difficult, and getting involved in Libya could indeed be a Vietnam-type experience. So please, please resist it. But on Colonel Gaddafi himself, you were quite right to say that what's happening in Libya is really very wrong indeed. But of course we knew that even before the uprising. Just last year he declared a holy war, a jihad, against the Swiss. He tried to blackmail the European Union. Do you remember? He said, give us €5 billion or we'll flood you with migrants. And of course he's the man who was happy to embrace al-Megrahi, the man who committed the biggest ever mass murder in British history. But what you didn't tell us in your speech was about the fact that you actually know Mr Gaddafi. Indeed, you went to meet him in December, didn't you? Do you remember? In fact, there was a jolly nice photograph of you and Mr Gaddafi holding hands. In fact, I have to say, I've never seen you smiling more or looking happier. Perhaps he's an old drinking mate. I don't know. Well, Mr President, yesterday indeed was Europe Day, and in the courtyard here we had armed soldiers, we had the Luftwaffe band and imperial eagles, we had the flag being paraded, being raised, the European anthem. It was a display of militarism and EU nationalism. I thought and hoped it was all just a bad dream. And in your defence of your position, in your defence of your beloved acquis communautaire, your body of law, you resort to intolerance, you resort to nationalism. You make me realise that what I saw yesterday was actually for real. You attack those who want to control their own border policies. You attack them today as xenophobes. You attack them as extremists. But worst of all, you attack them 3 times for being populists. Isn't that a dreadful thing? The power of the ballot box. When people dare to vote no in referendums, they're populists. When they want to control their own borders, they are populists. I put it to you that populists are actually Democrats, and you abuse those that want to fly the flag of populism. Well, here it is, Mr Barroso. Here it is, and that flag has represented liberal democracy far more than any other member state of this European Union, and it will go on long after your star-spangled banner has disappeared.
Thank you. Next speech.